A lot of it is just knowing what you can and can't do. Sometimes what you're going to find is the attorneys just aren't knowledgeable, and that's where it sort of just pays to sort of knock on multiple doors. Don't just take sort of the first answer and whatnot. And the benefit of this is you don't have to live in that state to be able to take advantage of their trust laws. I mean,
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Richer Geek podcast. It's my pleasure to introduce Antony Joffe. He's chairman of Sterling Trustees, a South Dakota chartered independent corporate trustee providing trust administration services to clients around the world. Sterling is well known for his independence and unparalleled service, combined with a fixed fee compensation model instead of asset under management fees. We all like that. This barrier to outside influence or conflict of interest enables Sterling to remain focused on the goal of administering trust in accordance with the grantor's wishes, which is you and I, and the needs of beneficiaries. How are you doing, Antony?
great. Thanks for having me on.
So let's a little bit about yourself. I'd like to start the podcast out with a little bit of a background. Who is Antony?
Yeah. So I started Sterling Trustees about 17 years ago. My dad and I started, so family-owned business. Prior to that, I guess I was a CPA by training, did my 2 years of indentured servitude with one of the big six accounting firms, and then spent
Yeah.
about 15 years in investment banking. And my dad was a practicing trust and estates attorney and had really developed a practice around helping families that needed an independent corporate trustee. And, he sort of served in that capacity as an individual. And over his career, built up to a point where he had about $800 million of assets that he was personally responsible for. Started thinking about succession planning and what happens if he got hit by the proverbial bus. Wanted to make sure his clients were taken care of, and decided to create a corporate trust company and move all the assets out of his name into this entity. And he went ahead and did that. Quickly realized he couldn't run his legal practice and run the trust company with all the regulatory and fiduciary risks that came along with it, and that's what
Oh, yeah.
created the opportunity for me. So he called me at the end of '07 as the market was going to hell in a handbasket. It seemed like a good time to get out of the investment banking world into a more recurring revenue business. And, I joined him, and,
Yeah.
here we are 17 years later.
Well, that was very nice of him. Just like, hey, now's a good time for you to have more stress, me to have less.
That's right.
That's
Timing is everything.
timing is everything. So, for those that don't know, maybe they're just starting out and they're just out of college. What is a trust?
Yeah, so a trust is, think of it as a vehicle to be able to transfer wealth to another generation. Typically, most people think of a will, and the
Hmm.
will basically sets out that, on my death, I'm going to give XYZ dollars to my wife, maybe some to my kids, and so forth. And, they get that money outright. But a
Hmm.
lot of families, that have created maybe some wealth, or they have kids that, they don't think are fiscally responsible,
Yeah.
think that a trust is a better vehicle to do that in. And so all the money would go into a trust. You would have a trustee that's
Hmm.
typically an independent person that would manage the assets in the trust, and then they would make all the decisions regarding what distributions they would make to the beneficiaries or the heirs of the family to receive that money. And there's lots of different combinations and different types of trusts to serve different types of purposes. But, for all intents and purposes, that's sort of the basic estate planning purpose of a trust.
Yeah, it is kind of like the start, and you still have maybe a brother or sister or someone in the family that kind of runs it, but then they're factory worker, or they're whatever. It's like, oh, they don't know all this documentation, and that's the importance of having someone like you, right? They can
Yep.
go alongside and say, okay, this is what this all this means.
Yeah. No, I think a lot of people, a parent asks you to be the trustee of their trust or
Yeah.
whatever. They think it's a great honor and privilege, but most of them don't realize sort of the fiduciary risk that they're taking on in terms of, you need to have legal knowledge, you need to have investment knowledge,
Yeah.
accounting knowledge, tax knowledge, and, most of them don't have that. They may have a little bit of investment knowledge, and so when something goes off the rails, they're going to land up in hot water, like they'll get sued by the beneficiaries. Most of them don't have errors and omissions insurance to cover any losses, and so they typically are going to dig into their pockets, and so it could really become a nightmare. The other
Mhm.
thing you see is, they'll name oldest brother or sister is the trustee,
Yeah.
and now younger brother, younger sister have to go to older brother to get a distribution. And you can imagine the issues that potentially causes within the family. And so we as an independent corporate trustee don't have any axe to grind and
Hmm.
can preserve that family strife. And we bring all that knowledge and expertise to the table to manage that regulatory and fiduciary risk.
And it's also important, you know, we are talking about if you have children. If you don't have children, well, it still goes into maybe charities or it goes to nieces and nephews. It goes to different things. You don't have to. People say, "Well, I don't have any children. I don't need one of these."
Yep. No, that's exactly right. I mean, it could go to aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, charities, maybe alma mater. I mean, there's lots of possibilities, and depending on sort of the size of the wealth that you've created, you could have multiple charities. So it really depends how you wanted to go out, and a trust gives you that flexibility to be able to manage that and sort of.
Mhm.
Uh, you can't really sort of rule from the grave, but at least your wishes will,
Yeah.
continue on, past death and whatnot. And, hopefully you can do some good.
Now, is it in the trust or is it in a will to where you say, and I think it's a good idea, if you are giving it to nieces and nephews, let's just say, I don't want them to have it until you can do stipulations within the
Yep.
trust, or is
Yep.
that within the will?
No, in a trust too. I mean, trust
Mhm.
typically you can have, kids are entitled to get the principal or the income of the trust on an annual basis. And then at age
Yeah.
35, they could get one third of the principal of the trust. And age
Yeah.
55, you can get another percentage or whatever. So you see that a lot. There is
Hmm.
danger in that obviously, if it's a big trust, you're getting a lot of money that could get blown and,
Yeah.
obviously could lead the beneficiary into a lot of issues. The other thing is, you don't know who your kids are going to marry. And let's just say you make a distribution at age 35 of a couple $1 million and next day you decide to get divorced, half that money could disappear. So
Hmm.
sometimes that is good and sometimes it's bad. We think it's better to keep the money in the trust, leave it at the trustee's discretion as to when to distribute so that you don't get yourself into a situation where you find yourself in a divorce and that money disappears, or we make that distribution and you've got creditors coming after you. Now all of a sudden that money is available to them to get, and that's the other thing that trust can really help protect assets against.
So what you're saying is that if you put it in the trust, and let's just say that I give an annual salary, it's just a distribution.
Yep.
Can those, would you have to do like a prenup, or it's like, how do you protect that annual salary? Can you actually, because a lot of people are thinking it's like, oh yeah, I never thought about if my child got a divorce.
Yep.
How do you protect it from the ex?
Yeah, so you really just make the trust discretionary. So instead
Mm,
of paying out the annual income of the trust or whatnot, the beneficiary just needs to go to the trustee and ask
mm,
for a certain amount, and you just distribute out what's needed versus making
mhm.
lump sums that potentially land up in a ex-spouse's hands or in a
Yeah,
creditor's hands if you get yourself into a pickle with whether
mhm.
it's IRS or um, I don't know,
Yeah.
tree falls in your house and kills somebody. I mean, you think of all
Mm,
the dangerous things that could go wrong where maybe insurance coverage doesn't protect you.
that's good. Now, we'll get into what you do as far as the South Dakota Trust, and you're saying that it's the trust capital of America. Why is that? And what's so great about a South Dakota Trust?
Yeah. So this really every state has its own trust laws, and those
Mm,
laws sort of vary by state. South Dakota today really has the most progressive trust laws out there. So
mm,
some of the features that are, really useful for our clients is A, there's no state income tax or capital gains tax.
mm,
So any income or capital gains that grows in the trust, you only pay tax at the federal level. You don't pay any state income tax or capital gains tax. So you really can start to compound your money much quicker. So take for example, California, for example, where you're paying a 13% income tax or capital gains tax. If you're paying that on your trust income every year, it takes a huge bite out of it. And so for South Dakota purposes, you could defer that. Secondly, they have what's called no rule against perpetuities, meaning that you can have a trust that goes on forever. So for some very wealthy families, that's a great way
Mhm.
to sort of perpetuate your wealth for multiple generations.
Mhm.
They have great asset protection. So once assets sit in trust for 2 years, they really become bulletproof for creditors. A beneficiary can't be forced to get a distribution out of a trust to pay a credit for example. So great asset protection. The other thing they have is great privacy laws, and there's sort of two pieces to that. One is at the age of 18, most states you have to notify the beneficiary of the existence of the trust, and they're entitled to get statements. So you can imagine 18-year-old
Oh,
kid going to college finds out they're the beneficiary of a million, $5 million, $10 million trust. Sort of a great way to sort of stifle their ambition and whatnot. So South Dakota's
mm,
silent as to that. You don't have to notify the beneficiary, and you can put language in the trust document that says, I don't want the kid finding out about the trust until they're age 40 and functioning
mhm.
members of society, so that any income they're getting from the trust, just becomes sort of a security blanket versus something they get addicted to and want to live off of every year. Yeah,
Right.
the last piece of privacy really is if the trust is ever made part of a lawsuit, you can have the trust permanently sealed in South Dakota, so it'll never see the light of day. And where this becomes useful is uh, going back to that kid getting divorced. Maybe they've enjoyed the benefits of the distributions that their spouse got, but now they're out of the family and they want money, and so they want to get at the trust document and at the trust
Mhm.
accounts and whatnot. And in South Dakota, you can shut that down and have it permanently sealed and whatnot. So for wealthy families, that's a great way to sort of protect their kids long term.
Now, what if, from experience, when last time I bought a hotel, the bank wanted to know um, everything, personal financial statements, but I had to tell them that I had to trust.
Yep.
Same in South Dakota, or I don't have to
Yeah, no, you still need to disclose that stuff.
disclose it.
But if it was made part of a lawsuit, different situation.
It locks.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's interesting because I know in some states, and this could be the people in your business or the attorneys, they're saying, well, a trust is maybe, and it's different with the South Dakota trust, but they're saying, you know what, you need an FLP or something. You need something else that'll lock it, more so,
Yep.
or a bridge trust, or these different things that the trust all of a sudden jumps to in case there's something.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, no,
you know,
you can do that sort of stuff. I mean, I think what you find is, if you go to a trust and estate attorney and I don't know, just name a state, let's say Arkansas, for example,
mhm,
most Arkansas attorneys will know Arkansas law and you tell them, well, I want to move a trust. I want to create my trust in South Dakota. And, a lot of them just aren't familiar with the South Dakota laws. And so,
yeah.
they'll sort of poo-poo it and say, well, you can do this in Arkansas. And then maybe they're putting an LLC underneath the trust to add a
Mhm,
layer of protection and whatnot when you can go directly to South Dakota and not have to deal with, these fancy structures underneath.
mm,
And by getting it out of state, you add another sort of layer of protection in terms of asset protection and whatnot. So, if you've got a creditor in Pennsylvania, or in Arkansas, you've got to go to South Dakota to get in front of a judge to get paid versus,
yeah.
it's a lot easier if you're in Arkansas to do that.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is just knowing what you can and can't do. Sometimes what you're going to find is the attorneys just aren't knowledgeable, and that's where it sort of just pays to sort of knock on multiple doors. Don't just take sort of the first answer and whatnot. And the benefit of this is you don't have to live in that state to be able to take advantage of their trust laws. I mean, South Dakota's got very progressive trust laws. There's Delaware.
Mhm.
Alaska, Nevada, Tennessee, New Hampshire are really sort of the top tier states. But today South Dakota is sort of the biggest one out there, believe it or not.
That's nice. And as we all know, the attorneys that are going to sue you, they want the low hanging fruit. And all of a sudden
Yep.
they're like, oh, I got to go there and I got to do this. And
Yep.
and I don't know anything about it. They're just most likely going to blow it off, right? Or
Yep.
not take it.
Yeah, no, it's exactly right. I think, and then it potentially just becomes a negotiation. So instead of having to pay 100 cents on the dollar, maybe you're only paying 10 cents on the dollar. So
Yeah.
it just puts you in a much better negotiating position if there is liability or whatnot. Uh, so um,
Mhm.
so people should take advantage of it. Don't be
Mhm.
put off by what an attorney might say to you. You can take advantage of any trust state's law if you want to set up a new trust.
Yeah, and that's very important. So what we're getting in the age of tech, age of AI. It used to be, I'm just going to sit down, you send me 45 pages of something, I fill in the blanks, and I want cremated or I want this, I do this.
Yep.
How's tech playing a role nowadays in trust?
Good question. I mean, I think the the drafting of trust, I think, is probably becoming a little more automated with
Mhm.
AI and that kind of stuff. You can get stuff done quicker, better, cheaper. You still need to know that your trusted state attorney knows what they're doing, but because I think some attorneys get sort of just addicted to the forms and as you said, they're just filling in names, charge you a fixed
Yeah.
fee and they're on to the next client, but they couldn't tell you what exactly was in that in that form that they created. But so I think that's probably one area. I think the other area that's probably a little bit off, but I could see sort of the blockchain being
Mhm.
used for accounting for trust, because obviously trust could go on for multiple generations, and
Mhm.
you need like a set history of transactions and history and whatnot. And that's where I think the blockchain could be really useful going forward. And so I think in the future here, sort of trust accounting platforms will be built on the blockchain. So, we'll see
Mhm.
whether or not that comes to fruition here in the next 5, 10 years.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question. Trust has been around for forever. We've seen different trusts. I don't know if these attorneys say, "Hey, you need this," and then all of a sudden you have five different trusts.
Yep.
Um, and where do you see it in 5 years? Are you going to see this evolution of maybe away from perpetual trust to something new? What do you see in the next 5 or 10 years in the evolution of trust?
Yeah, I don't know if there'll be much of an evolution other than, maybe just sort of maybe an arms race as to what other features and functions you could add to a trust. A lot of states just haven't updated their trust laws in many years, and as a result,
Yeah.
a lot of assets have flowed out of states into, more progressive trust states like South Dakota. So I think states will probably want to stop that flow, and so I think either updating their laws or, you know, whether or not, you know, you have to pay tax in the home state
Yeah.
that you're in, even though you've created a South Dakota trust. I
Mhm.
think there might be some potential clawbacks there that they might want to look at because they're potentially losing out revenue. I mean, California, for example, is, trying to get their claws into
Oh, yeah.
everything. So we'll see where that goes. I mean, the Supreme Court, there's been a couple of cases over the last, I guess, 5 years that sort of shut that down, but we'll see how that goes in the future. So
Yeah.
so
Yeah. California is getting desperate, I think. It's like if you move out of California, you still have to pay. They're thinking about exit taxes now.
Yep. Yep. No, that's exactly
Um,
right. That's exactly right. So, yeah, so I can see sort of maybe that coming to pass here, especially, high tax states where people
mhm.
are moving out quickly and they're losing tax base and whatnot. That might be a way to sort of hang on to it. So we'll
Yeah.
see.
Yeah.
Yep.
Very interesting.
Yep.
So Anthony and everybody, it's Sterling Trustees. Someone comes to your website, they click on, what educational materials, what are they going to find on your website?
Yeah, you'll find a ton of information on our website, a lot of information on different types of trusts and how they work. We've done also a lot of white papers on
Mhm.
comparing different trust states and their trust laws, so you can see what the differences are and whatnot. Um, we actually also have a very useful feature. We call it a tax calculator, where basically you can put in, the amount you're going to deposit into the trust, and you can see how it would grow in South Dakota versus, say, a high tax state of California or New York or Connecticut,
Mhm.
just so you can see the growth of those assets, so that if you do go to a trust and estate attorney in California or New York and they tell you you can't do this and it's
Mhm.
not worth it, you can give them the graph and show them the millions of dollars you're going to accumulate using South Dakota versus California or New York trust, for example.
Yeah, everybody, I know a lot of you are living in California and you're sitting there, it's like, yeah, you know what? Maybe I should look at this South Dakota trust. And, because a lot of our listeners are California, Washington, they're
Yep,
tech-based type of people.
sure.
Um,
Yeah.
what do you think
That's where
about,
trust could be really useful, particularly for California and
yeah,
Washington tech entrepreneurs, where you're potentially getting options or
yeah,
low basis stock in companies. Get it out of your name and into a trust, because if those things explode in value, you've got a $13 million lifetime gift exemption. You get above that amount, now you're in an estate tax. You got an estate tax problem. You can move it out into a trust and protect it and get it out of your state and save that 40% estate tax. So there's a lot of planning you can do there to really save yourself long term there.
yeah. Anthony, I always like to end. Is there anything that I've missed, something else that you'd like to inform our listeners that maybe I didn't hit on?
No, I think we hit on a lot of it. I mean, I think it's never too early to start planning.
Yeah.
Particularly when you're in your 30s and 40s, you might start having kids and you go get your will
Hmm.
drafted, and you maybe thought about creating a trust. And typically at that time, you name your friend as a trustee, and your trust, he's usually the same age as you. So when you die, they're likely going to be dying around the same time if they
Yeah.
live a long full life. And so people don't think about those things, and that's really where a corporate trustee can be really useful to make sure there is that continuity going forward. And then it's as we just touched upon, are you going through an exit opportunity from the sale of a business or getting stock options in a venture-backed company that's going to the moon, and how do you protect those assets in a high tax state? Those are things that even in your 20s and 30s you should start thinking about.
Yeah, because there's not a lot of people's like, well, I don't make enough money to have a trust or a will and things like that. That's
Yeah.
kind of it's illogical, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, listen, you might take an auto worker that's worked really hard and sort of that
Yeah.
millionaire next door, and
Hmm.
managed to sock away a couple $1 million during their lifetime, and maybe has three kids that maybe aren't that sophisticated, don't know how to deal with money, and haven't been as thrifty as
Hmm.
they've been, and he wants to make sure that that money not only lasts for his kids, but maybe could pay for college costs for his grandkids and whatnot. And that's where, a trust, even if it has $1 million in it,
Hmm.
has a useful purpose to ensure that that legacy continues and that money doesn't get blown right away on death.
Yeah, and ladies and gentlemen, this is very important. And you have probate, you have all these different things that people don't realize. So you don't want the courts to determine whether or not your heirs get your money or not.
Yep. No,
Uh,
that's true. So I mean, when
mhm.
you die, I mean, there's really sort of two ways you can, get assets to your kids. Obviously one is through a will, and you've
Mhm.
got obviously probate costs there, but you can also set up a revocable trust today where you can
Yeah.
put all your assets into that, get it titled and so forth, so that when you die, you don't even have to go through probate. The trust
Mhm.
now becomes an irrevocable trust, and life carries on, and you can save a lot of costs and headaches going forward as well.
Yeah.
So that's another, good use of a trust, long
Mhm.
term.
Yeah. Well, Anthony, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming on the Richer Geek podcast. Everybody, go to the website and talk to Anthony. How can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, so go to our website, which is www.sterlingtrustees.com. Again, www.sterlingtrustees.com. Well, feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm reachable at 610-234-0626. Again, 610-234-0626. And, happy to have a conversation and, try to educate you on this. It's not an easy topic, but it's an important topic. And, we're there to help.
All right, Anthony, thank you so much for coming on the Richer Geek podcast. Have a great night.
Thanks. Thanks, man.